The silence of the observation deck was not truly silent. It was a pressurized hum, a low-frequency vibration of recycled air and electromagnetic shielding that most people learn to ignore. Adrian Cole never learned to ignore it. To him, sound was texture, and the silence of the Terran Diplomatic Corps cruiser Aegis felt like sandpaper against his eardrums. He stood before the glue-steel viewport, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of the planet below. Lunaris. It did not look like a strategic asset as the military briefings described it. It did not look like a resource node as the corporate lobbyists claimed. From 20,000 kilometers up, Lunaris looked like a breath held in the dark. The planet was a sphere of silver and bioluminescent indigo, swirled with clouds that seemed to catch the light of the distant twin suns and fracture it into opal spectrums. The forests down there were not green. They were metallic crystalline structures that reportedly sang with the wind. Adrian pressed his forehead against the cold, transparent aluminum. 5 years. It had been 5 years since he had last stood on a bridge like this, looking down at a world he was about to break. The memory hit him with the precision of a sniper's round. The heat of the twin suns of Shiseti, the reptilian ambassador's clicking speech, the word Cathar, which Adrian had translated as surrender, because his superiors had been impatient, because the databanks suggested a 90% probability, because he wanted to go home. Cathar did not mean surrender. It meant martyrdom. The resulting orbital bombardment had lasted 6 hours. The civilization was gone before Adrian had finished filling out his paperwork. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from behind him, cutting through the static in his head. Adrian did not turn immediately. He watched the reflection of General Rowan Hale materialize in the glass. The man was a slab of granite in a dress uniform, his chest decorated with enough ribbons to bind a small galaxy. "It is bright," Adrian said, his voice raspy from disuse. "High albedo due to the crystalline flora." "Always the academic," Hale said, stepping up beside him. The general smelled of synthetic coffee and gun oil. "Do not pretend you are not impressed, Cole. That down there is the crown jewel of the Sector 7 expanse. Energy readings off the charts. The locals call it the living core. We call it the solution to the energy crisis on Earth." "And the locals?" Adrian asked, finally turning to face the older man. "Do we call them an obstacle?" Hale smiled a tight expression that did not reach his eyes. "We call them potential allies. That is why you are here. The Terran Diplomatic Corps pulled a lot of strings to get your clearance reinstated. You were the best xenolinguist we had. The only one who ever successfully mapped a semi-biological language syntax. I am retired general." "You are hiding," Hale corrected his voice, dropping an octave. "You are hiding in a basement archive in London translating dead dialects for museums. You are rotting, Adrian. And while you rot, the galaxy keeps spinning. We need this treaty. The Fox Empress Selene Renard has finally agreed to a high-level summit. But in her court they speak in riddles. Metaphors wrapped in cultural nuance. Our algorithms are choking on it." Hale turned back to the viewport, staring down at the silver world with a hunger that made Adrian's stomach turn. "This is a chance for redemption, Adrian," Hale said softly. "Do not mistake my generosity for weakness. I need a translator who can hear what isn't being said. You get us that treaty, and the file on Shiseti disappears. You become the hero who gave Earth the stars, not the man who burned a world." "And if I refuse?" "We are already in orbit," Hale said, checking the chronometer on his wrist. "The shuttle departs in 45 minutes. Wear your dress blues, and try to shave. You look like a convict." Hale walked away, his boots striking the deck with rhythmic authority. Adrian turned back to the planet. The silver forests seemed to pulse a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that crossed the vacuum of space. He was not a hero. He was a man who knew that words were dangerous things, capable of ending lives faster than any particle cannon. "Redemption," Adrian whispered to the glass. It sounded like a lie even in his own language. The descent was a lesson in vertigo. The shuttle dropped through the upper atmosphere, shaking violently, as it punched through the ionization layer. When the clouds broke, the view stole the breath from everyone in the cabin. The mirror palace did not sit upon the ground. It grew from it. Spires of translucent crystal pierced the sky, twisting like frozen smoke. The entire city was built into the canopy of the titanic silver trees, suspended 1,000 feet above the misty forest floor, by bridges of woven light and glass. It was a city of reflections. Everywhere Adrian looked, he saw the sky, the trees, and the shuttle multiplied by 1,000 surfaces. Atmospheric composition is breathable, the pilot announced. Gravity is 0.9 of Earth standard. We are touching down on the Grand Plaza. Adrian sat across from Mira Santos, the mission's xenobiologist, and his assigned assistant. Mira was frantically tapping on her datapad, her dark curls bouncing with the turbulence. She was young, brilliant, and possessed an energy level that Adrian found exhausting. "Are you seeing these spectral readings?" Mira hissed, leaning forward. "The ambient electromagnetic field is singing, literally singing. It is in a major key. How is that possible?" "A planetary magnetic field should be static, but it is modulating." "Just keep the sensors running," Adrian murmured, clutching the safety bar. "And try not to offend anyone. The briefing said they value composure." "I am composed," Mira said, checking her reflection in the darkened window. "I am the picture of scientific detachment. Oh, look at that architecture. Is that structural glass or diamond?" The shuttle touched down with a hiss of hydraulics. The ramp lowered and the air of Lunaris flooded in. It was cold, crisp, and smelled intensely of ozone pine needles and something spicy, like crushed cinnamon. Adrian stepped out, blinking in the kaleidoscope light. The Grand Plaza was a vast expanse of polished obsidian surrounded by the soaring crystal spires. And waiting for them was the court of the Fox Empress. They were humanoid, tall and lithe, possessing an elegance that made the Terran soldiers in their rigid armor look like clumsy automatons. Their skin ranged from pale moonlight to deep obsidian, but it was their features that marked them. Large, triangular ears, twitching atop their heads, and long, luxurious tails that swept behind them. Adrian froze. He had seen the holograms, of course, but seeing them in person was different. The bioluminescence was not just clothing. It was biological. The tips of their ears and the fur of their tails glowed with a soft pulsing light, amber teal violet. "Stop staring," a voice whispered in his ear. Adrian jumped. Mira was beside him, smiling fixedly at the delegation while speaking through her teeth. "You are staring at their tails, Adrian. In their culture, the tail indicates social standing and emotional state. Staring at it is like staring at a human's well. It is rude. Eyes up." "I was analyzing the kinetic syntax," Adrian muttered, forcing his gaze to the faces of the welcoming committee. The sway seems to correlate with the syllabic stress of their speech. "Sure," Mira said. "Just do not get us executed before lunch." A tall figure stepped forward from the alien group. He was clad in robes of shifting silk, his fur a deep russet red. His ears were tipped with crimson light, and his expression was one of barely concealed disdain. This was High Counselor Kurath. Adrian recognized him from the dossier. The leader of the conservative faction. The man who wanted Earthships was gone yesterday. "General Hale," Kurath said. His voice was deep resonant, and his Terran was perfect, though accented with a rolling purr. "You persist in returning. We had hoped the gravity well would be too much for your heavy vessels." "Counselor Kurath," Hale replied, stepping forward with a military salute. "The Alliance honors its commitments. We are here to finalize the stewardship treaty." "Stewardship," Kurath repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. "A polite word for occupation. But come. The Empress waits, and she is curious to meet your new voice." Kurath's yellow eyes slid to Adrian. There was intelligence there, sharp and predatory. This is Adrian Cole, Hale introduced, gesturing. Our lead linguist. Kurath stepped closer, towering over Adrian. He sniffed the air, his nose twitching slightly. You smell of old parchment and fear human. Do try not to stutter in Her Majesty's presence. She dislikes boredom. Without waiting for a reply, Kurath turned his massive tail swishing with a dismissive flick and led them toward the great doors of the palace. The interior of the Mirror Palace was a disorientation of light. Walls were not solid barriers, but layers of semi-transparent crystal, creating the illusion that they were walking through a solid block of diamond. Music seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a low melodic thrumming that sounded like wind passing through silver leaves. They entered the throne hall. It was a cavernous space, the ceiling lost in a haze of hanging lights. At the far end, upon a dais, raised high above the floor, sat the Empress, Celine Renard. She was lounging, rather than sitting, her posture fluid and relaxed. Her fur was the color of fresh snow, stark white against the dark silk she wore. 9 tails, Adrian counted them, his breath, catching 9 tails of pure white, fanned out behind her, like a peacock's train, their tips glowing with a soft, ethereal blue light. As the Terran delegation approached, the music swelled, then abruptly cut to silence. Celine shifted, leaning her chin on one hand. Her eyes were violet striking and amused. She looked at General Hale, then at Kurath, and finally her gaze landed on Adrian. It felt like a physical touch. So, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the hall with perfect clarity. It was a voice of smoke and velvet. This is the weapon you brought to fight me, General Hale, a man with dust on his coat. He is a scholar, Your Majesty, Hale said stiffly. Celine stood up. She was tall, taller than Adrian, and she moved down the steps of the dais with the grace of water flowing downhill. She stopped 3 feet from him. Up close, the scent of cinnamon and ozone was overpowering. Human scholar, she said, tilting her head. Her ears twitched forward interest. People say you once mistranslated a war. You turned a surrender into a slaughter because you did not understand the nuance of a single click. The room went deadly silent. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. Hale stiffened beside him. Mira stopped taking notes. Celine leaned in, her violet eyes locking onto his. There was a challenge there, a spark of dangerous playfulness. Shall we see if you can mistranslate a planet too, Adrian Cole? Adrian swallowed his throat dry. He forced himself to hold her gaze. To look away now would be submission. I am here to listen, Your Majesty, not to speak. Celine smiled, revealing sharp white teeth. A listener. How novel. Usually your kind only knows how to shout. She spun around her 9 tails, sweeping a gust of air against Adrian's legs. Let us begin this farce. The council is convened. The first session was a disaster. They sat at a long table carved from a single piece of floating driftwood. On one side, the Terran military and corporate attachés. On the other, the Fox Council elders with fur graying at the muzzle and eyes hard as flint. The energy output of the living core is unstable, General Hale argued, pointing to a holographic projection floating in the center of the table. Our readings show tectonic stress. If you do not allow us to install stabilizers, this planet will crack within 50 years. We have a sacred responsibility to preserve sentient life. Sacred responsibility? Kurath scoffed, slamming a clawed hand onto the table. You speak of responsibility while your drills wait in orbit. You want the core for your warp drives. You do not care if Lunaris cracks as long as you harvest the energy first. We offer technology, a corporate rep interjected. Medical advancements, infrastructure, in exchange for a mere 20% of the core's surplus output. Lunaris is not a battery. A female counselor hissed, her ears flattened against her skull. The core is the soul of our ancestors. To drill into it is to lobotomize our history. Adrian sat in the middle, translating the nuances that the auto-translators missed. He whispered corrections to Hale. She did not say history general. She said living memory. The distinction implies consciousness, not just record-keeping. Hale ignored him. We are talking about security, counselor. If the core overloads, it takes the system with it. We are offering salvation. We do not need your salvation, Kurath roared. And we do not need your permission to secure this sector, Hale shouted back, his patience snapping. The tension in the room spiked. Guards on both sides shifted their weapons. The air crackled with the psychic output of the angry Fox Council. The lights in the room flickered red. Enough! The word was spoken softly, but it silenced the room instantly. Celine had not spoken for an hour. She sat at the head of the table, watching the argument, like one watches a dull play. She stood up slowly. You argue over who owns the house, she said, walking toward the center of the room. But neither of you has asked the house if it wishes to be sold. She gestured to the side entrance. The heavy crystal doors parted. A hush fell over the council. A nursemaid walked in carrying a bundle wrapped in silver cloth. Celine took the bundle with a tenderness that contradicted her sharp demeanor earlier. She turned to the room and lowered the cloth. It was a cub, a fox cub, perhaps 4 or 5 years old in human terms. Her fur was not white like her mother's, nor red like Kurath's. It was silver metallic and shifting exactly like the leaves of the forest outside. Her eyes were large, entirely black, reflecting the room like mirrors. This is Astra, Celine said. She did not introduce the child as a princess or an heir. Just Astra. She placed the cub on a small secondary throne beside her own. The cub sat up blinking. She looked at the terrifying General Hale, then at the furious Kurath, and finally at Adrian. She tilted her head. The council says the planet belongs to the foxes, Celine said, pacing around the child. The humans say the planet belongs to the galaxy, but Astra is the only one Lunaris speaks to. Your Majesty, Kurath warned, his voice low. This is highly irregular. The child is unwell. She is not fit for public display. She is not unwell, Kurath. She is connected. Celine turned to the Terran delegation. Her face was hard, stripped of all humor. You claim you have the best linguist in the sector. You claim you want to understand us. She placed a hand on the cub's head. Translate my cub's speech and I'll sign the planet over to you. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient hum of the palace seemed to stop. Hale blinked. I beg your pardon. You heard me, General, Celine said. Astra speaks, but she does not speak Fox and she does not speak Terran. She speaks for Lunaris. If your man, she pointed a long clawed finger at Adrian, can translate her words and tell us what the planet actually wants, I will sign your treaty. I will give you 20%. I will give you joint stewardship. And if he fails, Hale asked, his eyes narrowing. Then you leave, Celine said coldly. You pack your ships, you recall your drills, and you never set foot in this system again. We forfeit nothing. This is madness, Kurath hissed. She is a child, she babbles nonsense. Then the humans will fail and we will be rid of them, Celine countered, her eyes, flashing dangerous fire at her own advisor. Unless you are afraid of what she might say, Kurath. Kurath growled deep in his throat but sat back down. Celine turned back to Adrian. Well, scholar, do you accept the wager? Adrian looked at the cub. Astra looked back. There was something terrifyingly ancient in those black eyes. This was not just a diplomatic test. This was a trap, or a plea for help. Bring the equipment, Adrian said, his voice steady despite the shaking of his hands. 10 minutes later, the center of the room was a tangle of wires and sensors. Mira worked frantically, hooking up the standard translation matrix to a specialized directional microphone array. Okay, Mira whispered, wiping sweat from her forehead. Audio capture is live. The algorithm is set to pattern recognition. Ready when you are. Adrian knelt before the cub. He was at eye level with her. Astra smelled of rain and iron. "Hello, Astra," Adrian said softly. "Can you speak to us?" The cub opened her mouth. It was not a word. It was a sound that defied the spectrum of human hearing. A trill, a chirp, a low, resonant purr that seemed to vibrate in the teeth of everyone in the room. It rose and fell in a complex staccato rhythm. Cree thrum click so. The translation screen on Mira's console lit up. Error. Syntax unknown. Error. No biological match. Error. "It's gibberish," Hale muttered, crossing his arms. "Just animal noises." Astra spoke again, louder this time. The sound was layered harmonic, like two voices speaking at once. "Valum krch." "The machine is giving me nothing," Mira panicked. "It's reading it as background noise, wind, tectonic shifting. It's not isolating the vocals." Kurath laughed, a harsh barking sound. "As I said, toy technology. The child is simple. She mimics the wind." Adrian closed his eyes. He ignored the screen. He ignored the laughing counselor and the sweating general. He listened. He had spent his life studying structure, subject, verb, object, tense, mood, aspect. But this wasn't linear. It wasn't a chain of information. He felt a vibration in the floor. It matched the thrumming in the cub's throat. He looked at the holographic display of the planet's core. The pulses of light on the map were synchronizing with the child's breathing. Thrum click. It wasn't a language of words. It was a language of state, of being. "It is not nonsense," Adrian whispered. He stood up, turning to Celine. "What did you say?" Celine asked, her tail still waiting. "It is not a personal language," Adrian said, his voice gaining strength. "She isn't speaking for herself. She is resonating. The syntax, it's fractal. It mimics the biological growth patterns of the forest and the tectonic shifts of the core. She is not describing the planet, Your Majesty. She is the planet, or at least she is the mouth that the planet is using." Celine's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of genuine surprise, and perhaps respect, crossed her face. She had expected him to fail or to guess. She had not expected him to see the truth. "He is bluffing," Kurath snapped. "He is using flowery words to hide his incompetence." "I can prove it," Adrian said. He looked at Hale. "I need time. The standard algorithms won't work. I need to build a new translation matrix based on geological and botanical data, not linguistic rules. Give me access to the environmental sensors." "You have 48 hours, Hale said, checking his chronometer. "If you do not have a translation by then, I am taking control of this negotiation." Celine stepped forward. "No. He stays as long as it takes." She looked at Adrian, and for a moment the mask of the Empress slipped, revealing a tired, lonely woman beneath. "You have heard the music, haven't you, scholar? You are the first one to hear the music and not just the noise." She turned to the room. "The wager stands. Adrian Cole is the designated listener. If he solves the riddle of Astra's speech, the treaty is yours. If he fails, humanity leaves Lunaris forever." She clapped her hands. "Session adjourned." The court dispersed in a flurry of whispers and rustling silk. Kurath shot Adrian a look of pure venom before sweeping out. Hale grabbed Adrian by the shoulder, his grip bruising. "Do not mess this up, Cole. You are walking a thin line." "I am working, General," Adrian said, pulling away. Eventually, the hall was empty, save for Adrian, Mira, and the guards at the door. Celine had taken the cub and vanished into her private chambers. "I need a drink," Mira said, collapsing into a chair. "A large one. Did you see the look on the Empress's face? She wanted you to win. Or she wanted to see Kurath lose. I cannot tell." "She is playing a dangerous game," Adrian said, packing up his gear. "She is betting her sovereignty on a translator she just met." "Well, you did impress her with that fractal syntax bit. Was that true, or were you improvising?" "It was true," Adrian said. He looked at the empty throne where the cub had sat. That child is not just a biological anomaly. She is a receiver. They walked out of the hall, heading toward the guest quarters assigned to them. The corridor was long-lined with mirrors that reflected their tired faces. As they passed a junction, Adrian paused. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck. He looked down a side hallway. It was empty, bathed in dim blue light. But he felt a presence. "Adrian," Mira called out from ahead. "Coming." "1 second," Adrian said. He took a step down the side hall. "Hello." Nothing. Just the hum of the crystal walls. Then he heard it. Not with his ears, but inside his skull. A voice, clear as a bell, speaking perfect, unaccented English. "You're late." Adrian spun around his heart, hammering against his ribs. There was no one there. He looked down. At the far end of the hall, peeking around a corner, was Astra, the silver cub. She stared at him with those black, bottomless eyes. She blinked once, slowly, innocently. Then she pulled her head back and vanished. Adrian stood frozen. The voice had been an adult's voice. Or something timeless. It certainly wasn't the voice of a child who only made chirping noises. "You're late." "Adrian!" Mira shouted. He jolted. He rubbed his face, his hands trembling. Stress. It had to be stressful. Hallucinations were a common side effect of sleep deprivation and guilt. He was projecting. He had to be. "Coming," Adrian called back, his voice sounding hollow. He walked away from the empty hallway, but the whisper remained echoing in the silence of his mind, like a ghost in the machine. He had come to translate a language, but as he walked into the dark heart of the Mirror Palace, Adrian Cole began to suspect that he was the one being read. The Garden of Echoes was less a laboratory and more a cathedral of biology. It was a sprawling, domed enclosure attached to the eastern wing of the Mirror Palace, where the flora of Lunaris grew in uncontrolled, riotous splendor. The plants here did not photosynthesize sunlight. They fed on sound. The crystalline ferns chimed when the wind brushed them, and the towering silver-bark trees hummed a low basso continuo that vibrated in the marrow of Adrian's bones. It was beautiful. It was also a prison. Adrian Cole sat at a makeshift workstation, surrounded by monitors rubbing his temples. He had been awake for 30 hours. The data scrolling across his screens was a chaotic waterfall of acoustic signatures and synaptic firing patterns. "You look terrible," Mirasano said. She was perched on a crate of supplies, sketching on her data pad. Like a reanimated corpse, but with less personality. "Thank you, Mira," Adrian muttered, adjusting the frequency on the Neurolink headset. "Your support is the wind beneath my wings." "I am serious, Adrian. You need sleep. The Diplomatic Corps manual specifically states that decision-making capability drops by 40% after 24 hours of wakefulness." "We do not have 24 hours, Adrian replied. He typed a command sequence and the screen flashed red. Another failure. "General Hale gave us a deadline. If I do not crack this syntax, the only decision I will be making is which seat to take on the evacuation shuttle. That is the best-case scenario. The worst case involves orbital bombardment." Mira sighed, dropping her stylus. She turned her datapad around to show him her drawing. It was a caricature of a fox with an exaggeratedly long tail wrapped around a tiny panicked stick figure labeled Adrian. The caption read, "Death by fluff." "It is a coping mechanism," Mira said defensively, as Adrian stared at it. "I am categorizing their body language. Speaking of which, have you noticed the guards? Every time you recalibrate the frequency, their ears swivel exactly 15 degrees to the left. It is like they can hear the electricity." "They can," Adrian said. "Their hearing range extends into the ultrasonic. We are loud to them, Mira. Just our presence here is noise pollution." The heavy crystal doors at the far end of the garden slid open. The ambient humming of the plants spiked in volume, a welcoming crescendo. Empress Selene Renard walked in. She was not wearing her ceremonial robes today. Instead, she wore a fitted tunic of midnight blue silk that left her arms bare, revealing faint glowing markings on her skin, bioluminescent tattoos that shifted slowly, like drifting clouds. Astra trotted beside her, the silver cub sniffing at the singing ferns. Adrian stood up, smoothing his rumpled shirt. He felt a sudden irrational consciousness of his unshaven jaw and the dark circles under his eyes. "Working hard or hardly working, scholar?" Celine asked. Her voice was light, but her violet eyes swept over the equipment with the precision of a scanner. "Your Majesty," Adrian bowed slightly. "We are attempting to isolate the carrier wave of Astra's vocalizations. It is challenging." Celine walked past him, trailing her hand along the console. Her 9 tails drifted behind her, a soft cloud of white fur and blue light. She stopped next to his chair close enough that he could smell that signature scent of ozone and cinnamon. "Challenging," she repeated. "That is a polite word for failure. Kurath tells me you are merely recording static." "Kurath is an idiot," Mira blurted out, then clamped her hand over her mouth. "I mean, High Counselor Kurath has a unique perspective, Your Majesty." Celine laughed a sound like silver bells. "Do not apologize, Dr. Santos. Kurath is an idiot. But he is a powerful one. He is currently petitioning the Council to have you removed from the garden. He says your machines are disturbing the sanctity of the plants." "We are passive observers," Adrian said, stepping in to defend Mira. "We are not broadcasting." "I know," Celine said softly. She looked at Astra. The cub had found a patch of moss that chimed like tiny bells when touched. Astra was tapping it rhythmically, tap tap pause tap, and laughing as the moss responded. "She likes you," Celine noted, watching the child. "She usually hides from strangers, but with you she is curious." "She called me late," Adrian said. He had not meant to say it. It slipped out. Celine turned to him, her expression sharpening. "She spoke to you in Terran." "I thought so," Adrian stammered. "In the hallway after the first session. I heard a voice in my head, but it might have been exhaustion." Celine studied him for a long moment. The playfulness vanished, replaced by an intense scrutiny. "The bond between the child of Lunaris and the planet is not just sound, Adrian. It is thought. It is a memory. If she projected a thought to you, it means your mind is open enough to receive it. That is rare. Even among my people, few can hear the whisper without training." She moved closer, her tails curving around her legs. "Perhaps that is why you translate. You do not just swap words. You feel the intent." Adrian felt his heart rate climb. "That is the job, Your Majesty." "Is it?" Celine reached out her clawed finger, hovering inches from his chest, right over his heart. "Or is it that you are looking for something to fill the silence inside you?" The tension in the air was palpable. Mira quietly busied herself with some cables in the corner, pretending to be invisible. "I need to understand something," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The signals Astra produces. They match the planetary core resonance. But there is a lag, 3 milliseconds. Why?" Celine smiled, enigmatic and terrifying. "You are asking the wrong questions. You look at the data, but you do not look at life." She turned her back to him, her tail swaying. "Come. If you are to save my planet and your career, you need to understand who you are talking to. I cannot teach you the song of the core, but I can teach you the language of the tail. It might save your life if you insult the wrong guard." "I am a quick study," Adrian said. "We shall see." Celine flicked her tails, all 9 of them, in a synchronized rippling wave that ended with a sharp snap. "What did that mean?" Adrian blinked. "Aggression A, warning to back off," Celine chuckled. "That was a greeting, Adrian. It means I acknowledge your presence and find it agreeable. If I wanted to warn you," her tails stiffened, the fur puffing out until they looked twice their size, and the blue lights at the tips turned a deep, burning violet. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, charged with static. "That," Adrian swallowed, "is a warning." Very good. Celine relaxed, the tails softening instantly. Now, what about this? She turned slightly, looking over her shoulder. One tail, the central one, curled slowly around her own waist, the tip brushing against her hip in a slow, rhythmic motion. Her eyes locked onto his half-lidded. Adrian felt the blood rush to his face. I do not have a reference for that in the database. It means curiosity, Celine murmured, stepping closer again. It asks, what are you hiding? I am hiding nothing, Adrian lied. He was hiding everything. The guilt of Shiseti, the fear that he was incompetent, the growing realization that he found the Empress of a hostile alien species devastatingly attractive. Liar, Celine whispered, but she did not pull away. Tell me, human, in your world, what is the word for a pack that is not blood? Family, Adrian said. But we also have chosen family. People you pick. Not because you share DNA, but because you share a soul. Celine looked stunned. The concept seemed to strike her physically. She looked at Astra, then back at Adrian. Chosen family. In our tongue we say Kithra. It means those who share the same wind. She looked down at her hands. I was taken from my birth parents when I was 3. The council raised me. They told me a ruler has no family, only subjects. I have spent 200 years in a palace of glass, surrounded by millions of people, and I have never been more alone. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the woman beneath the crown. You are not alone now, Adrian said. He surprised himself with the boldness of the statement. Celine looked up, her eyes wide. For a second, the distance between them, species, politics, history, seemed to vanish. Then the doors hissed open again. High Counselor Kurath swept in, flanked by 2 armed guards. The moment shattered. Celine's posture instantly shifted, from vulnerable to imperious. Her tails lashed once, a sharp, dismissive motion. Counselor, Celine said, her voice ice. I did not summon you. Your Majesty, Kurath bowed, though his eyes remained fixed on Adrian with open contempt. I apologize for the intrusion, but there are matters of state and security concerns regarding the humans' experiments. He walked over to the console, his heavy robes rustling. He picked up the Neuralink headset Adrian had been working on. You intend to connect your primitive mammalian brain directly to the child? Kurath asked, turning the device over in his hands. That is blasphemy. Her mind is a conduit for the sacred core. You will burn out your synapses. We have dampened the signal, Adrian said, stepping forward to take the headset back. It is safe. We need a direct interface to translate the syntax. Safe for whom? Kurath sneered. He dropped the headset back onto the table a little too hard. If you harm the child human, there will be no treaty. There will only be an execution. He turned to Celine. The council is restless, Majesty. They say you spend too much time with the invaders. They whisper that you have forgotten the old ways. Do not give them a reason to question your fitness to rule. It was a threat, naked and ugly. Let them whisper, Celine said, her chin high. I am the Empress. I do not answer the whispers. Even an Empress can bleed, Kurath said softly. He signaled his guards. I will leave you to your playdate. Kurath marched out, but not before casting a lingering, calculating look at the Neuralink device. When he was gone, the air in the garden felt colder. He is right about one thing, Celine said, her voice tight. We are running out of time. My protection has limits, Adrian. Solve the riddle, soon. She called for Astra. The cub ran to her, clutching a piece of silver moss. Celine scooped her up, casting one last unreadable look at Adrian, and left. Well, Mira said, breaking the silence. That went well, except for the part where the scary foxman threatened a coup and implied you were going to fry your brain. Adrian stared at the Neuralink headset. He is scared, Mira. He is terrified that we might actually succeed. Later that night, the pressure mounted from the other side of the sky. General Hale's holographic image flickered above the comms table. The connection was grainy. The ion storms in the upper atmosphere were intensifying. "Progress report, Dr. Cole," Hale barked. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "We have isolated a recurring pattern," Adrian lied smoothly. "A complex mathematical sequence embedded in the audio. I need 24 more hours to decode the cipher." "You have 12, Hale cut him off. "We are picking up massive energy spikes from the planet's crust. The geologists say the tectonic plates are grinding. The planet is reacting to something. If that energy releases, it could wipe out the fleet's sensors. We need that treaty signed so we can deploy the stabilizers." "General," Adrian said, leaning into the pickup range. "This isn't just geology. The planet is aware. If you deploy drills or stabilizers without permission, it will fight back. I have seen the trees move when no wind is blowing." "Spare me the mysticism," Hale snapped. "You are there to do a job, not to go native. Remember Shiseti Adrian. Remember the cost of hesitation. If you cannot get the Empress to sign, I have authorization to initiate Plan B." "What is Plan B?" Hale's face was grim. "Forced stewardship. We take the core, secure the energy, and deal with the diplomatic fallout later. It will be bloody, Adrian. Millions of these foxes will die. Do not make me give that order." The hologram was cut out. Adrian stood in the dark lab, the silence ringing in his ears. 12 hours. He was trapped between a hammer and an anvil. On one side, a general willing to commit genocide for energy. On the other, a counselor willing to sacrifice his Empress for tradition. And in the middle, a child who spoke with the voice of a planet. "Mira," Adrian called out. "Wake up. We are doing the full link." Mira groaned from her makeshift cot. "Adrian, it is 3 in the morning." And Kurath touched that headset. "I do not trust it. We do not have a choice. Check the diagnostics. I am going in." The preparation took an hour. Mira ran 3 separate diagnostic cycles on the Neurolink. "Everything looks green," Mira said, chewing on her lip. "Signal gain is normal. Feedback loops are shielded. But Adrian, your cortisol levels are through the roof. If you panic there, the interface could amplify it. You could stroke out." "I will be fine," Adrian said, strapping himself into the chair. He placed the headset over his temples. The cool metal pressed against his skin. "Just monitor the connection. If my heart rate goes over 180, pull the plug." 180, Adrian, that is heart attack territory. "Just do it." Adrian closed his eyes. "Initiating link." Mira pressed the key. The world dissolved. It was not like falling asleep. It was like being pulled inside out. The darkness behind his eyelids exploded into white, blinding light. First came the sound. A roar like 1,000 oceans crashing at once. Then, the feeling of roots burrowing into the earth of sap moving through veins that were miles long. He felt the weight of mountains on his shoulders. He felt the cold vacuum of space pressing against the atmosphere. Pain. It wasn't his pain. It was the planet's. An ache in the crust, a burning fever in the forest where the landing ships had scorched the canopy. Then, through the chaos, a single clear note. A voice. Astra. He saw her. Not as a cub, but as a point of pure silver light navigating the storm. She was singing. And the planet was answering. Mira's voice came from far away, distorted and tinny. "Adrian, look at the waveform, it is a duet." Adrian focused. He pushed past the pain, past the noise. He visualized the garden. He visualized the data. Mira was right. Astra wasn't just broadcasting. She was harmonizing. The planet would send a pulse of tectonic stress, a low, grinding note of anger. Astra would catch that note, hold it, and sing a counter melody, a high, soothing trill. The planet's note would shift, softening, calming. She was a regulator, a living tuning fork. She keeps the planet sane, Adrian realized. Without her, the energy of the core would consume everything. "I see it!" Adrian gasped, his physical body thrashing in the chair. Mira, record this. It is a feedback loop. She is soothing the core. I am recording, Mira shouted. But Adrian, your vitals. Your blood pressure is spiking 160, 170. Suddenly, the signal changed. The soothing melody twisted. It became jagged sharp. A screech of feedback tore through Adrian's mind. Something is wrong, Mira yelled. The gain, it is jumping. Someone bypassed the limiter, Kurath. The realization hit Adrian just as the pain blinded him. Kurath hadn't broken the device. He had rigged it. He had set a trap that would trigger only when a deep connection was made. The amplifiers surged to 400%. Adrian, I cannot shut it down. The controls are locked. Inside the vision, the storm became a hurricane. The silver light of Astra was being swallowed by a red tide of agony. The planet screamed. Adrian felt his own mind beginning to fray. The synapses were firing too fast. He was going to die. He was going to burn out right here in the chair, just as Kurath wanted. No. He thought of Seti. He thought of the fire raining down. He thought of the silence after the translation error. I will not let it happen again. He didn't pull back. He pushed forward. He drove his consciousness straight into the red storm, searching for the silver light. Astra, he screamed with his mind. Hold on, he found her. Or she found him. The storm vanished instantly. He was standing in a forest. But it was not the garden. It was a forest of pure glass, perfect and silent. Standing in front of him was a child. She was humanoid, perhaps 10 years old, with silver hair that floated, as if underwater. She had fox ears and 9 translucent tails, but her face was human. She wore a simple white dress. She looked at him with eyes that held the weight of galaxies. You are hurt, she said. Her voice was the one he had heard in the hallway. I am fine, Adrian wheezed, looking at his hands. They were transparent, fading. Where are we? The space between, she said. She reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, solid. The bad man tried to hurt you. He turned the volume up too high. Kurath, Adrian said. He wants me to fail. He is afraid, the child said. He thinks different means are dangerous. But you... She looked up at him, tilting her head exactly the way the cub did. You are different, but you are safe. I am not safe, Astra, Adrian said, his voice trembling with emotion. I destroyed a world once. I am a monster. No, Astra said firmly. She squeezed his hand. You made a mistake. Monsters do not cry when they make mistakes. You have been crying for 5 years. She placed a hand on his chest. You listened, she whispered. Everyone shouts. You listened. The world began to dissolve. The red warning lights of the laboratory were bleeding through the sky of the glass forest. I have to go back, Adrian said. I have to tell them. Not yet, Astra said. You are not ready to translate yet, but you are ready to be. To be what? She smiled, a sad, wise smile that broke his heart. To be part of the pack. She hugged him. It was a rush of pure emotion, love, trust, and a desperate need for protection. It washed away the guilt of Seti. It washed away the cynicism. Dad, she whispered. The word hit him harder than the neuroshock. What? Adrian gasped. Wake up, Dad! Slam! Adrian convulsed his body, arching off the chair. Sparks showered from the headset as the circuits fused and melted. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air smoke, rising from the interface ports. Adrian! Mira was screaming, tearing the hot metal band off his head. Adrian, breathe! Come on, breathe! He coughed, a violent spasm that racked his ribs. He tasted copper and burnt plastic. I am alive, he croaked. Barely, Mira was crying, slapping his face gently. Your heart stopped for 6 seconds. I had to use the defibrillator. The machine just surged. It blew every fuse in the garden. The doors burst open. Kurath strode in, followed by Selene. The Empress looked terrified, her fur bristling. Kurath looked smug. "What happened?" Celine demanded, rushing to Adrian's side. She ignored the protocol, kneeling on the dirty floor in her silk gown. "Is he alive?" "An unfortunate accident," Kurath said, smoothly, standing over them. "I warned you, Majesty. The human brain is too primitive to handle the sacred link. He has likely lobotomized himself." Adrian pushed himself up on one elbow. His head felt like it had been split open with an axe. He looked at Kurath. He saw the faint, satisfied twitch of the counselor's ear. "It was not an accident," Adrian rasped. "He is delirious," Kurath said, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Get him to the medical bay. If he survives, he can be on the next shuttle out." Adrian grabbed Celine's arm. His grip was weak, but desperate. "Celine," he whispered, using her name for the first time without a title. She froze. "I am here." "I saw her," Adrian whispered, his eyes locking onto hers. "She is not just a conduit. She is a bridge, and she chose me." "Who chose you?" Celine asked, her voice trembling. "Astra," Adrian said. "She called me Dad." Kurath laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Pathetic. The brain damage is severe. He is hallucinating familial bonds with a wild animal." "It was not a hallucination," Adrian said, staring at Kurath with a newfound cold clarity. "And the surge was not an accident. The limiter was bypassed." "Only someone with council override codes could do that." Kurath's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Accusations from a dying man," Kurath spat. Celine looked from Adrian to Kurath. Her violet eyes hardened into diamonds. She stood up, helping Adrian to a sitting position. "Mira," Celine said, her voice commanding. "Secure the data logs from the machine. If there was an external override, I want to know whose code was used." "I will check immediately," Mira stammered, scrambling to the smoking console. Celine turned to Kurath. "And you, Counselor. You will pray that the logs are empty. Because if I find your digital fingerprint on this machine, I will not need a treaty to start a war. I will start one right here in this room." She looked back down at Adrian. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else. Hope. "She called you Dad," Celine whispered, so only he could hear. "Yes," Adrian breathed, the memory of the glass forest fading, but the warmth of the small hand still lingering in his palm. "She did." Celine closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. "Then, you are not going anywhere, Adrian Cole. Rest now. Tomorrow we will finish this." Adrian slumped back against the console darkness, overtaking him again. But this time, it was not the darkness of the void. It was the darkness of sleep. And in the silence, he heard the faint, distant sound of a silver fox barking a joyous welcome. He was not just a translator anymore. He was a target. And for the first time in 5 years, he had something worth fighting for. The day of listening was not a holiday. It was a reckoning. The Moon Observatory stood at the highest peak of the Crystal Mountains, a vast, open-air amphitheater carved directly into the bedrock of the planet. Above, the twin suns were setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the silver forests below. But the real light came from the ground itself. The veins of the living core were pulsing just beneath the stone floor, a rhythmic thrum of bioluminescent blue that matched the beating of a giant subterranean heart. Adrian Cole stood at the center of the dais. He felt small. Around him, the amphitheater was packed. To his left, the Fox Council sat in tiers of floating obsidian, their robes shimmering, their ears swiveling like radar dishes. High Counselor Kurath sat at the front, his russet fur groomed to perfection, his expression one of smug anticipation. Behind him, hundreds of priests and nobles watched with critical, glowing eyes. To his right, the Terran delegation. General Hale stood with his senior officers, their dress uniforms stiff, their hands resting near their sidearms. They looked out of place here, gray blocks of concrete, in a world of glass and light. And in front of him, on the highest throne, sat Empress Celine Renard. She wore white, the color of mourning and rebirth. Her 9 tails were spread in a fan behind her, motionless. Astra sat on a cushion at her feet, looking small and fragile against the vastness of the sky. "The time has come," Celine's voice rang out, amplified by the acoustics of the mountain. "For generations we have listened to Lunaris through the whispers of our ancestors. Today, we break tradition. Today, we asked a stranger to translate the voice of our home." She stood up and walked down the steps until she was eye level with Adrian. The crowd held its breath. "Translate my cub's speech," she said, repeating the words that had started it all. But the playfulness was gone. Her violet eyes were dark, heavy with the weight of a gamble that could cost her everything. "And I will sign the planet over to you." It wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a plea. "Do not make me choose between my crown and my conscience," her eyes seemed to say. Adrian nodded. He turned to Mira, who was manning the portable console at the edge of the circle. She looked pale. "Readings are erratic," Mira whispered, as he approached to take the headset. "The electromagnetic field is spiking. Adrian, that surge yesterday, the device is compromised. I patched it, but if Kurath tries anything—" "If he tries anything," Adrian said, his voice surprisingly steady, "the planet will know." He put the headset on. It felt cold against his temples. He knelt before Astra. The cub looked up at him. She didn't chirp or trill. She just stared, her black eyes reflecting the darkening sky. "Ready," Adrian said. He activated the link. This time, there was no transition. The world didn't dissolve. It shattered. Pain. It hit him like a physical blow, doubling him over. It wasn't just a headache. It was the sensation of his skin being peeled back of his bones, vibrating until they cracked. The sky above the amphitheater turned a bruised purple. A crack of thunder, soundless, but felt in the teeth, rolled across the mountains. The silver forests below began to shake the trees, thrashing as if caught in a hurricane that no one else could feel. "The sky," someone screamed from the council tiers. Bolts of jagged red lightning began to arc from the ground, up into the clouds. The air smelled of burning ozone and fear. Inside the link, Adrian was drowning. The data stream was corrupted. It wasn't the clean musical fractal he had seen before. It was a chaotic screech of noise. Kurath's interference was amplifying the planet's distress signal, turning a conversation into a torture session. "Get out," the noise screamed. "Foreign body. Parasite." "It is rejecting him," Kurath shouted triumphantly, leaping to his feet. "See, the planet rejects the invader. Break the link before he kills the child." "Hold," Celine commanded, though her hands were gripping the arms of her throne, so hard her knuckles were white. Adrian gritted his teeth. Blood began to trickle from his nose. He could feel General Hale's eyes on him, calculating, assessing. He knew what Hale was doing. He was signaling the fleet. The mission failed. Prepare orbital extraction. In the chaos of his mind, Adrian saw the vision again. The glass forest. But the trees were shattering. And there, in the center, was Astra. Not the cub, but the girl. She was on her knees, covering her ears, screaming silently, as the red lightning tore through her sanctuary. "Stop!" Adrian shouted in the void. "You are hurting her." "You are hurting us!" the girl screamed back, her face contorted in agony. "You bring machines. You bring lies. You translate only what you want to hear." The scene shifted. Suddenly, Adrian wasn't on Lunaris. He was back on Shiseti. He saw the burning cities. He saw the reptilian ambassador holding out a hand in peace, clicking that fatal word. Cathar. And he saw himself 5 years younger, tired and afraid, nodding to his commander. "It means surrender. They are giving up." He saw the bombs fall. He felt the heat of 1 billion lives extinguished because he had been too cowardly to say, "I do not know." "Is this who you are?" Astra's voice cut through the fire. "A man who speaks the convenient lie, no," Adrian whispered. The tears on his face were hot. "Then speak the truth," Astra yelled, pointing at him. "The machine is lying. The Council is lying, even if you are lying. Tear it off." Adrian opened his eyes in the physical world. The amphitheater was in chaos. The ground was shaking violently now. Cracks were appearing in the stone floor, leaking blinding blue light. "General Hale," a soldier shouted. "Seismic readings are critical. We need to evacuate and abort Cole." Hale barked, drawing his sidearm. "That is an order. Step away from the creature." Kuroth was chanting something in the ancient tongue, a binding spell designed to sever the connection by force. Adrian looked at Astra. The cub was whimpering, her small body convulsing with every tremor of the earth. She was the filter, and she was clogging. The planet's rage was flowing through her, and she was too small to hold it. If he stayed connected, the feedback would kill her. If he disconnected and walked away, the fleet would burn the planet. There was no third option. Not with the machine. Adrian reached up. "What is he doing?" Mira screamed. With a savage jerk, Adrian tore the Neuralink headset off his head. He threw the expensive military-grade device onto the stone floor and smashed it with his heel. Silence. The red lightning vanished. The screeching feedback stopped. The crowd froze stunned by the sudden stillness. "He broke the connection," Kuroth sneered. "He admits defeat." "No," Adrian said. His voice was raw, but it carried. He didn't look at Kuroth. He didn't look at Hale. He looked only at Astra. He knelt down on the hard stone, lowering himself until his forehead touched the ground in front of the cub. It was a posture of submission, not to an empress, but to a child. "I do not need a machine to hear you," Adrian whispered into the silence. "I am sorry. I was trying to read you like a book. But you are not a book. You are a song." He closed his eyes and emptied his mind. He forgot the grammar tables. He forgot the syntax algorithms. He forgot the mission parameters. He just felt. He felt the cold stone under his knees. He felt the vibration of the core. He felt the fear radiating from Celine. And he felt the small, terrified heartbeat of the cub in front of him. "I am here," he thought, not as a translator, just as Adrian. Slowly, tentatively, a presence brushed against his mind. It wasn't the overwhelming roar of the planet this time. It was a shy, quiet melody. "Dad," Adrian smiled. Tears streamed freely down his dust-covered face. "I am here, Astra. Tell them. I will be your voice." The cub stepped forward. She placed a small, furred paw on Adrian's head. The connection flooded back, but this time it was pure. It wasn't data. It was emotional. It was images. It was a truth so simple and so profound that it made the complex political arguments of the Council look like children's squabbles. Adrian stood up. He turned to face the assembly. He looked at General Hale, who still had his hand on his gun. He looked at Kuroth, whose smugness was beginning to crack. "She does not want your treaty," Adrian said. Hale's face hardened. "Then we are done here." "Wait," Adrian raised a hand. "She does not want your treaty because a treaty is between owners. She says Lunaris cannot be owned." He walked toward the Council, his voice gaining strength. "You ask for territory," Adrian pointed at the map of sectors. "You draw lines on a map. But Lunaris says the land is not a floor you walk on. It is a skin. When you drill, you do not harvest resources. You draw blood." He turned to Kuroth. "And you," Adrian said, his voice cold. "You claim to protect her, but you treat the core like a battery for your throne. You built a palace of glass on top of a living heart, and you wonder why it beats so fast. You are not protecting her. You are choking her." "Blasphemy!" Kuroth roared, standing up. "Guard, seize him!" "Sit down!" Celine's voice cracked like a whip. "Let him finish." Adrian looked back at Astra. The cub was glowing now, a soft, pulsating silver light that matched the rhythm of his own breathing. "She is not asking for us to leave," Adrian said softly. "She is lonely. She has been singing to the stars for 1,000,000 years, waiting for someone to sing back. She wants the humans to stay. A murmur ran through the Terran delegation. But Adrian continued, locking eyes with Hale. Not as masters, and not as guests. She wants us to be symbiotes. Symbionts? Hale frowned. Explain. She will give us energy, Adrian translated, feeling the words flow through him from the cub. Freely, without drills. The excess heat of the core is enough to power 10 fleets. She wants to give it to me. But in exchange, we must become her immune system. Her immune system? There are things in the dark, Adrian said, his voice trembling, as he channeled an image he barely understood. Shadows moving between stars, ancient hungers. She is afraid of the dark. She wants the ships. She wants the soldiers. But not to aim at her. To aim outward. To protect her while she sleeps. He looked at Celine. And she wants the foxes to stop worshipping her, he said. She does not want priests. She wants gardeners. She wants you to take down the mirrors and let the sun touch the roots again. Silence descended on the mountain. It was a radical, impossible proposal. It stripped the council of their religious authority. It stripped the Earth military of their conquest. It turned everyone into servants. Ridiculous, Kurath scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual power. A child's fantasy. We are the masters of this world. We do not garden. Then you will die, Adrian said simply. The ground gave a sharp jolt, not a quake, a shrug. She is tired of you, Kurath, Adrian said. She says you are heavy. Suddenly, the stone beneath Kurath's tear cracked. A jet of blue steam hissed up, shattering the obsidian chair. Kurath scrambled away, losing his dignity, his robes tangling in his legs. The terrified counselors gasped. The planet had spoken. She attacked a high counselor, a priest whispered in horror. No, Adrian said. She just shifted her weight. She is done carrying dead weight. He turned to General Hale. And you, General, are you dead weight or are you ready to be useful? Hale looked at the scanner in his hand. The energy readings were stable. The red zones were turning green. The planet was offering a truce. If the energy output is guaranteed, Hale said slowly, holstering his weapon. And if the strategic alliance allows for orbital defense platforms, then the semantics of ownership are irrelevant to the diplomatic corps. He looked at Adrian with a grudging respect. You got your treaty, Cole. It is a weird one, but it is a treaty. Adrian let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 5 years. But it wasn't over. You speak of changing our way of life, Kurath shouted, regaining his footing. You speak of tearing down mirrors. This human is a heretic and our Empress. He pointed a shaking finger at Selena. She lets him desecrate our traditions. She is unfit. I call for a vote of no confidence, the council murmured. The threat was real. Tradition was a heavy chain and Kurath was pulling it tight. If she signs this, Kurath yelled, appealing to the crowd, she is no Empress. She is a traitor who hands our god over to aliens. Selene sat on her throne. Her face was pale. She looked at the angry nobles. She looked at the bewildered soldiers. She looked at Adrian, standing alone in the center of the storm, a man with no weapon but the truth. She looked at Astra, who was watching her, with expectant eyes. Slowly, Selene stood up. She reached up and unclasped the heavy, ceremonial collar of platinum and diamond that weighed down her neck. It crashed onto the stone floor with a heavy metallic ring. She walked down the steps. 1, 2, 3. She didn't stop at the dais. She walked past the council. She walked past Hale. She walked until she was standing next to Adrian. She turned to face her people. She didn't look like a ruler from a painting anymore. She looked fierce. She looked alive. Kurath is right, Selene said. Her voice was not amplified, but in the silence it didn't need to be. I am not fit to be the Empress of the Mirror Palace, gasps of shock. Because the Mirror Palace is a cage, she continued, and I am done being a zookeeper. She reached out and took Adrian's hand. Her palm was warm, her claws retracted. It was a gesture of shocking intimacy in front of two worlds. The human translated the words, Celine announced. But he did not just translate. He felt them. He stood between the lightning and the child when you, she glared at the council, ran for cover. She squeezed Adrian's hand. If Lunaris chooses him as a voice, Celine said, then I choose him as my partner in this stewardship. If you want to vote, no confidence, go ahead. But know this, the planet speaks to Astra. Astra speaks to him. And I speak for myself. She looked at Adrian, and for the first time her smile was completely open. No masks. No games. I am staying with the listeners, she said. The gambit was thrown. She had tied her legitimacy, not to the throne, but to the planet itself. If they rejected her, they rejected Lunaris. Astra let out a happy yip. She ran forward and wrapped her arms around Adrian's leg, burying her face in his trousers. Then, she reached out and grabbed Celine's silk dress with her other hand. It was a tableau. The man, the Empress, and the child. A triangle of defiance against the old order. The wind swept through the amphitheater. The silver trees below began to chime, not the angry roar of before, but a soft, melodic hum. A song of approval. General Hale cleared his throat. Well, he said, signaling his comms officer. Fleet Command, stand down, red alert. We are entering into a cooperative defense pact. And get me a gardening team down here. I think we are going to need them. Adrian looked at Celine. You just abdicated the traditional throne, he whispered. You risked everything. I did not abdicate, Celine whispered back, her violet eyes shining. I just moved the seat of power. It was getting uncomfortable up there anyway. She leaned in her voice, dropping to a murmur that only he could hear. Besides, she said, her tail brushing against his leg, you said you needed a family. I thought I would apply for the position. Adrian laughed. It was a rusty, unfamiliar sound, but it felt good. He squeezed her hand back. Application accepted, he said. The sanctuary of silver rain was a misnomer. It was not raining, and for the last 3 days, it had felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a very expensive, very beautiful cage. Located in the deepest sector of the Mirror Palace, the garden was a bubble of bioluminescence and silence, cut off from the political hurricane raging in the upper spires. Here, the trees did not just hum. They wept glowing sap that pooled in obsidian basins, creating a soft, rhythmic dripping sound that was meant to be soothing. To Adrian Cole, it sounded like a clock ticking down. He paced the perimeter of the garden, his boots making no sound on the mossy floor. It had been 72 hours since the day of listening. 72 hours since the ground had cracked, the Empress had abdicated her traditional authority, and the world had changed. You are going to wear a hole in the floor, a small voice said. Adrian stopped. Astra was hanging upside down from a low branch of a crystal willow, her silver tails dangling like Spanish moss. She looked completely unbothered by the fact that 2 solar systems were currently debating her existence. I am exercising, Adrian said, crossing his arms. You are worrying, Astra corrected. She dropped from the branch, landing lightly on her feet. Your cortisol levels are spiking again. Mom says when you worry, you smell like burnt copper. Mom, Adrian raised an eyebrow. Empress Celine, Astra amended, though. She grinned, revealing sharp little teeth. But she acts like a mom. She grooms my ears when she thinks I am asleep. The heavy blast doors at the entrance hissed open. Mira Santos walked in, carrying a tray of food and a data pad that looked like it had been through a war zone. Mira looked exhausted. Her lab coat was stained with coffee, and her hair was a disaster of static electricity. Delivery for the prisoners of state, Mira announced, setting the tray on a stone table. Synthetic protein mash for the human, spiced beetle larvae for the cub. Enjoy. What is the situation outside, Mira? Adrian asked, ignoring the food. Mira sighed, collapsing onto a bench. It is a mess, Adrian. A total unmitigated disaster. The council is split down the middle. The younger generation, the ones who actually go out into the forests, are rallying behind Celine. They are calling her the Voice Unbound. They have started wearing white ribbons on their tails in solidarity. And the old guard. Kurath is not going quietly, Mira said, rubbing her face. He has entrenched himself in the Hall of Ancestors. He is claiming that Celine has been compromised by alien psychic influence. That is you, by the way. He is rallying the priesthood. He says the day of listening was a mass hallucination induced by Terran technology. He knows that is a lie, Adrian said, his fists clenching. He felt the ground crack under his own feet. Faith is a stubborn thing, Adrian, especially when your power depends on it. Mira tapped her datapad. And then there is General Hale. He is holding the fleet at DEFCON 2. He wants a formalized treaty signed within 48 hours, or he is going to secure the strategic assets by force. He says he cannot leave a resource like the living core in the hands of an unstable government. 48 hours, Adrian repeated. Does Celine know? She knows, a melodic voice answered from the shadows. Celine stepped into the light. She looked weary. The bioluminescent markings on her skin were dim, pulsing with a slow, lethargic rhythm. She was not wearing her imperial robes, but a simple tunic of gray silk intended for meditation. It made her look smaller, less like a goddess, and more like a person carrying a mountain on her shoulders. I have just come from a private channel with Hale, Celine said, walking over to where Astra was poking at her beetle larvae. She ran a hand over the cub's head, an instinctive, protective gesture. He demands clarity. He demands control. He speaks of contingencies involving kinetic bombardment. He is bluffing, Adrian said, though he did not feel certain. Hale is a pragmatist. He won't destroy the thing he wants to harvest. He will if he thinks he cannot have it, Celine replied softly. Scorched earth is a human concept, is it not? She sat down on the bench opposite Adrian. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the dripping of the silver sap. I am terrified, Celine admitted. The confession hung in the air, heavy and startling. An Empress did not admit fear. If I push the council too hard, they will trigger the Civil War protocols. Brother will fight brother. The forest will burn. But if I give in to Kurath... If you give in to Kurath, Adrian finished, he will silence Astra. He will lock her away in the dark and force her to say only what he wants to hear. Celine looked at him, her violet eyes swimming with unshed tears. And if I continue down this path, I might lose everything. The throne, my history, my identity. I was raised to be the pillar of this empire, Adrian. If I tear down the roof, am I a liberator or just a vandal? Adrian sat beside her. He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. Her skin was cool to the touch. Let me tell you about Shiseti, Adrian said quietly. Celine turned to him. The war you caused... The world I failed, Adrian corrected. The inhabitants were the Cathar. They were a hive mind species. Very peaceful. When our ships arrived, they didn't panic. They didn't arm weapons. They just broadcasted a single repeating signal. A complex series of clicks. He looked at his hands. I was 25. I was arrogant. I thought I knew the universal syntax for aggression. The clicks sounded like a countdown, like a weapon charging. I told the commander they were preparing to fire. I told him to strike first. And what did it mean? Celine asked, her voice a whisper. It meant welcome home, Adrian said, his voice cracking. They thought we were the return of their ancestors. They were inviting us to land. I translated a greeting as a death threat. And because of me, 3 billion lives were extinguished in 20 minutes. Astra stopped eating. She looked at Adrian with wide, sorrowful eyes. I froze, Adrian continued. After the first bomb fell, I realized my mistake. I saw the pattern shift to one of sorrow, not anger. I could have screamed. I could have jammed the comms. I could have done something, but I was afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of the commander's anger, so I let them die. He squeezed Celine's hand. You are afraid that if you act, you will destroy your world. But Celine, the only thing that destroys a world is silence. It is doing what is expected, instead of what is right. Celine looked at him, searching his face. The connection between them, the one that had started in the throne room and solidified in the amphitheater, deepened. It wasn't just an attraction anymore. It was the shared scar tissue of leadership. You are not that man anymore, Celine said firmly. The man who stood before my council did not freeze. Because I had something to protect, Adrian said. He looked at Astra. Astra wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She hopped off the table and wedged herself between Adrian and Celine on the bench. She pushed Adrian's leg to the left and Celine's leg to the right until she fit perfectly in the middle. You two talk a lot, Astra said, swinging her legs. Blah blah war. Blah blah guilt. It is complicated, little one, Celine said, half smiling. Is it? Astra tilted her head. The planet talks to me. I will talk to you. You talk to the people. That is the line. But if you are both so busy listening to the planet, and listening to the generals and listening to the ghosts. She looked up first at Adrian, then at Celine. Who listens to you? The question struck Adrian like a physical blow. Who listened to the translator? Who comforted the Empress? Celine looked stunned. She reached down and pulled Astra into her lap, burying her face in the cub's silver fur. We listened to each other, Adrian said softly. He reached over and placed his hand on Astra's back, his fingers brushing against Celine's arm. That is how it works. That is the deal. Like a pack, Astra asked. Like a family, Adrian said. For a moment in that quiet garden, the war felt very far away. There was just the warmth of bodies, the smell of cinnamon and ozone, and the strange, undeniable rightness of a human, a fox and a child of the planet, sitting on a stone bench. Then, the blast doors opened again. Mira rushed in. She wasn't carrying food this time. She was carrying a datapad that was flashing red. Kuroth made his move, Mira said, breathless. He has called for the right of root binding. Celine stiffened. Her tails puffed out in immediate alarm. He cannot. That requires a unanimous vote of the High Council. He has it, Mira said grimly. He convinced the undecided members that Astra is a danger to herself. He argued that the energy surge during the link proved she is unstable. He says the only way to save the planet is to bind the child to the obsidian throne. What is the root binding? Adrian asked, sensing the horror in Celine's reaction. It is slavery, Celine hissed, standing up. Astra clung to her tunic. It is an ancient ritual. They use needles of black glass to sever the child's conscious will. They connect her nervous system directly to the throne's interface. She becomes a living processor. She will still hear the planet, and she will still speak for it, but she will have no thoughts of her own. She will say only what the person sitting on the throne commands her to say. They want to lobotomize her, Adrian said, sickened. They want to turn her into a microphone that they control, Mira said. And the ceremony is set for tomorrow night when the twin suns are in eclipse. The comms unit on Mira's belt beeped. It was a priority 1 channel. It is Hale, Mira said, handing the device to Adrian. A holographic projection of General Hale flickered into existence above the stone table. He was in his command center, the blue light of tactical displays reflecting on his face. Dr. Cole, Hale said without preamble. We have intercepted the Council's broadcast regarding this binding ceremony. General, it is a hostile act, Adrian said quickly. They are attempting to seize control of the communication interface. I am aware, Hale said, and I cannot allow it. If that child becomes a puppet of the anti-human faction, our position here becomes untenable. I will not have the energy source of the sector held hostage by a fanatic like Kuroth. Give us time, General. Celine stepped into the projection field. I can stop this. You have lost control of your council, Empress, Hale said coldly. My analysts predict that, once the binding is complete, Kuroth will order the planet to destabilize the crust under our landing zones. He will wipe us out. Hale leaned closer to the camera. I am issuing an ultimatum. If that ceremony begins, I will consider it an act of war. I will authorize a kinetic strike on the Mirror Palace to terminate the threat. I would rather destroy the interface than let it fall into enemy hands. You would kill us all, Adrian shouted. You would kill the child. I will save Earth's interests, Hale said. You have 24 hours to fix this coal. Either you get me a treaty that guarantees our safety, or I turn that mountain into a crater. Hale out. The hologram vanished. The silence that followed was terrifying. We have to run, Mira said, her voice shaking. We can take the shuttle. We can get Astra off-world. If Astra leaves the planet, Celine said dully, the core will destabilize on its own. The feedback loop will break. Lunaris will tear itself apart. We cannot run, Adrian said. He began to pace again, faster this time. His mind was racing, parsing verbs, definitions, legal structures. He was a linguist. He solved problems with words. Ownership, control, stewardship, binding. Kuroth is using the law against us, Adrian muttered. He is using the definition of the Empress as the owner of the planet. If the Empress owns the planet, she owns the voice of the planet. He stopped. He looked at Celine. What if you were not the owner? Celine blinked. I am the Empress. Yes, but what does that mean? Adrian stepped closer. In your constitution or whatever holy text governs this place, what is the definition of the Empress? The Empress is the supreme guardian, Celine recited. The keeper of the keys, the one who holds the leash. The leash, Adrian repeated. That implies the planet is a beast to be tamed. That is the problem. Kuroth wants to tighten the leash. He grabbed Mira's datapad. We need a new definition. We need a new word. He looked at Astra. The girl was watching him with intensity. What did Astra say in the amphitheater? Adrian asked. She said she wanted symbionts, not masters, not guests. Adrian, we do not have time for semantics, Mira cried. Semantics are the only thing we have, Adrian snapped. Then he softened. Celine, what if we propose a guardianship oath? A what? A legal restructure, Adrian said, his eyes lighting up. We draft a new document, a tripartite agreement. Earth, the Empire, and Lunaris. All three are signatories. A planet cannot sign a treaty, Celine said. Astra can, Adrian countered. She is the legal proxy. If we elevate Astra's status from subject to sovereign entity, then she cannot be bound. You cannot put a leash on an equal. The Council will never accept that, Celine said. It breaks 10,000 years of tradition. They do not have to accept it, Adrian said. They just have to witness it. If we perform the oath during the binding ceremony, if we hijack the ritual, we can change the nature of the bond before Kuroth can set the seal. Celine looked at him. She saw the desperation, but also the brilliance of the plan. It was madness. It was a linguistic coup d'etat. To hijack the rite of root binding, Celine whispered, I would need to know the archaic forms, the variants that were banned because they gave the planet too much power. Do you know them? Adrian asked. Celine looked at Astra. She looked at the white ribbons tied to the tails of the young foxes outside the palace walls. She looked at the sky where the destroyers waited. I have read the Forbidden Scrolls, Celine said slowly. There is a variant, the vow of the hollow bone. It does not bind the planet to the king. It hollows out the king to make room for the planet. That sounds dangerous, Mira noted. It is fatal to the ego, Celine said. But it grants the child the power of choice. She squared her shoulders. The exhaustion seemed to fall away, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. We will do it, Celine said. "We will go to the ceremony, and we will rewrite the script while the cameras are rolling." Night fell over the Garden of Silver Rain. Mira had retreated to the comms bunker to try and delay Hale. Astra had finally fallen asleep on a bed of glowing moss curled into a ball of silver fur. Adrian sat on the edge of the central fountain. The water here glowed a soft teal. "You should sleep." Celine's voice came from behind him. He turned. She had changed. She was no longer in the gray tunic. She was not wearing clothes at all, save for a simple wrap around her waist. Her fur was luminous in the dark, and her markings were swirling with complex patterns of light. But it was her demeanor that stopped his breath. She had removed the golden cuffs from her ears. She had removed the rings from her claws. She looked raw, wild. She sat next to him. She did not maintain diplomatic distance. Her leg pressed against his. "I cannot sleep," Adrian said. "I keep thinking about the words. If I get the syntax of the oath wrong, if I use the wrong preposition—" "Shh." Celine placed a finger on his lips. Her claw retracted just a soft pad of fur touching his skin. "You are thinking like a lawyer. Stop thinking. Feel." She moved her hand to his cheek. Her violet eyes were vast, containing nebulae of emotion he was only beginning to understand. "I need you to teach me something," she whispered. "What?" Adrian's voice was hoarse. "In your language," Celine said. "How do I say Naharu Kithra Sol?" "It translates roughly to I bond my soul to yours," Adrian said. "No," Celine shook her head. "I want the political translation, the one that Hale will understand, the one that Kuroth cannot argue with." "I choose you," Adrian translated slowly, "as my equal, not my subject." "I choose you," Celine repeated. Her accent was thick, rolling the R's, softening the vowels. "As my equal, not my subject," Adrian coached. "Not my pet," Celine tried squinting. Adrian laughed, a short, sharp release of tension. "No, subject. A pet as well, some humans have pets." "I know," Celine smiled, a wicked glint in her eyes. "I have seen the way you look at my tails. You think I am fluffy." "You are fluffy," Adrian admitted, his hand involuntarily, moving to brush the fur of the tail nearest him. It was incredibly soft, like spun silk and electricity. Celine leaned into his touch. She closed her eyes. "I choose you," she whispered again, her voice dropping to a husky purr. "As my equal, as my Kithra." "Family," Adrian supplied. "More than family," Celine said. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "In the old days before the mirrors, we did not have marriage. We had Kithra. It means the one who guards my back while I sleep." She leaned forward. Her face was inches from his. He could feel the warmth of her breath. "I am scared, Adrian," she confessed. "Tomorrow I might lose my crown. I might be exiled." "Then we will be exiled together," Adrian said. "I have a small apartment in London. It rains a lot. You would hate it." "It sounds perfect," she murmured. She closed the gap. It wasn't a human kiss. She pressed her forehead against his, her nose brushing his cheek, and he felt a low, vibrating thrum pass from her body into his. It resonated, a synchronization of heartbeats. For a moment he saw flashes of her memory, a lonely child in a glass tower, looking at the stars, wishing someone would come. He pulled back, slightly breathless. "Celine." "Don't speak," she whispered. "Just for tonight, do not translate." They sat there in the silence of the glowing garden, two leaders of warring species finding a truce in the space between breaths. Suddenly, a small rustle came from the moss bed. Astra was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. She looked at them, Adrian with his hand on Celine's tail. Celine with her forehead resting on Adrian's shoulder. "Are you done kissing?" Astra asked loudly. Celine jumped her fur, puffing out in surprise. Adrian coughed violently. "We were not kissing," Adrian said quickly. "We were exchanging cultural greetings." "It looked like kissing," Astra said skeptically. She trotted over and climbed onto Adrian's lap, effectively ending the moment. She looked at Adrian, her black eyes serious. "You know," Astra said, poking him in the chest. "You feel like the start." "The start of what?" Adrian asked, wrapping his arms around her. "The start," Astra said. "When I was in the dark, before I had a body. I remember the pattern. I remember the template." She looked at Celine. "Can I tell him now about the seed?" Celine stiffened. She placed a hand gently over Astra's mouth. "Not yet, little one," Celine said, her voice tight. "Tomorrow, at the ceremony, when the circle is drawn." "Why not now?" Adrian asked, sensing the sudden tension. "What template?" "You were there when I was born, Dad," Astra mumbled against Celine's hand. "You were just not here," Adrian frowned. "Astra, I was light years away. I was in a basement in London." "Distance is just a math problem," Astra said cryptically. Celine stood up, lifting Astra from his lap. The intimacy of the moment was gone, replaced by the impending weight of the dawn. "She is tired," Celine said, avoiding Adrian's eyes. "And so are we. We need to be strong for tomorrow." "Celine." Adrian stood up. "What is she talking about?" "What seed?" Celine paused at the doorway to the inner sanctum. She looked back at him. Her expression was a mixture of deep love and profound sadness. "The universe works in circles, Adrian," she said. "You brought a tragedy to Shiseti, but you also left something behind. A piece of yourself. A hope." "I do not understand." "You will," she said. "Tomorrow when we bind the roots, you will see exactly how deep they go." She vanished into the dark, taking the child with her. Adrian stood alone by the fountain. The water glowed. The words echoed in his mind. "You were there when I was born." He looked at his reflection in the water. He saw a man who had spent 5 years running from his past, only to find that his past had apparently sprinted ahead of him and was waiting on a silver planet to welcome him home. He touched his cheek where she had pressed her forehead. "Equal," he practiced the word, tasting it. Tomorrow, he would either save a world or die trying. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the translation error. He was only afraid of the silence. And he knew with a certainty that defied logic that silence was no longer an option. The chamber of root convergence lay deep beneath the crust of Lunaris, a hollowed-out geode the size of a city block. The ceiling was not stone, but a dome of transparent crystal that looked straight up into the glowing, pulsating veins of the living core. It was the heart of the world beating in a rhythm of slow, blinding blue light. The air here was hot and smelled of ionization and ancient dust. Adrian Cole stood near the edge of the obsidian dais, flanked by 2 royal guards, who were not there to protect him. To his right, the Terran delegation stood in a tight formation, General Hale checking the charge on his plasma rifle every 30 seconds. To his left, the entire High Council of Foxes sat in a semicircle, their eyes glowing in the dim light, waiting for the inevitable. High Counselor Kurath stood in the center of the dais. He wore robes of heavy black velvet, embroidered with threads of real gold. In his hand, he held the scepter of silence, a rod of dark glass, tipped with a needle-sharp point. "We gather here," Kurath's voice boomed, amplified by the natural acoustics of the chamber, "to bind the wild to the will, to secure the voice of our world against chaos and alien corruption." He gestured to the center of the room. Astra stood there. She looked tiny against the backdrop of the thrumming core. She wore a simple white shift, her silver hair loose, her 9 tails drooping slightly. She looked terrified. Celine stood a few feet away from her daughter. The Empress was pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was dressed in the ceremonial armor of the First Dynasty silver plates that caught the blue light of the core, but she looked like a prisoner in her own kingdom. "The right of root binding," Kurath intoned, "raising the scepter, is the highest law. It ensures that the child of Lunaris speaks with one voice, the voice of the Council, the voice of tradition. He looked at General Hale. "And to our human guests, let this be your assurance. Once the binding is complete, the child will no longer scream. She will no longer cause earthquakes. She will be a stable, predictable interface for energy transfer, just as you requested." Hale nodded stiffly. "Stability is all we ask for, Counselor." Adrian felt a cold sweat running down his back. He caught Celine's eye. She gave a microscopic nod. "Now." Kuroth stepped toward Astra. "Child of the planet, offer your hand. Let the glass pierce the vein. Let the mind be anchored." Astra trembled, reaching out her small hand. "I object," Celine said. Her voice was not loud, but in the oppressive silence of the chamber, it sounded like a gunshot. Kuroth stopped. He turned slowly, his lip curling in a sneer. "There are no objections in the chamber of Root's Majesty. The ritual has begun." "The ritual is flawed," Celine said, stepping forward. Her silver armor clinked against the stone. "You use the binding of the iron chain. It is an act of subjugation. It treats the planet as a beast of burden." "It treats the planet as a resource," Kuroth snapped, losing his composure. "Which is what it is, and you, Celine, have forgotten that you are its master, not its friend." "I have forgotten nothing," Celine said. She walked past Kuroth, standing between him and Astra. She turned to face the council. "I invoke the ancient variant, the vow of the hollow bone." A gasp ran through the Fox elders. "Heresy!" a priest shouted from the back. "That ritual is forbidden. It gives the planet the right to reject the crown." "It gives the planet the right to choose," Celine corrected. She looked at Adrian. "Adrian Cole, step forward." "Stay where you are human," Kuroth commanded, pointing the scepter at him like a weapon. "This is a sacred Fox rite. Your presence is a contamination." Adrian ignored him. He walked past the guards, past the furious counselor, and stood beside Celine. He felt the heat of the core radiating through the floor, vibrating in the soles of his boots. "He is not a contamination," Celine said, her voice ringing clear. "He is a witness, and he is a participant." She turned to Astra. "Little one, do you accept the binding of the iron chain?" Astra shook her head violently. "No." "Then, what do you choose?" Celine asked. Astra looked up. The blue light of the core reflected in her black eyes, turning them into pools of infinite depth. "I choose family," Astra whispered. Kuroth laughed a harsh, jagged sound. "Family. You are a biological anomaly. You have no family. You are a construct of energy and matter. You belong to the throne." "She belongs to herself," Adrian said. He stepped closer to Astra, kneeling down, so he was at eye level with her. "And she belongs to the people who listen to her." Astra reached out. She took Adrian's right hand. Then she reached out and took Celine's left hand. "I call the core to witness," Astra said. Her voice changed. It was no longer the voice of a child. It was the resonant, harmonic voice Adrian had heard in the glass forest. It echoed off the crystal dome, shaking the dust from the walls. "I choose Empress Celine Renard," Astra announced, her voice booming like thunder. "Not as my owner, but as my mother guardian." The ground gave a violent lurch. The blue light of the core flared brighter, flooding the room. "I choose Adrian Cole," Astra continued, "not as my translator, but as my father guardian." "Stop this!" Kuroth screamed, raising the scepter to strike. "Stop her! She is breaking the seal." He lunged forward, intending to drive the glass needle into Astra's arm to force the neural link. "No!" Adrian shouted. He threw himself in front of Astra. But he didn't need to. Before Kuroth could touch her, a pulse of pure kinetic energy erupted from the floor. It hit Kuroth squarely in the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward 20 feet. He slammed into the obsidian wall and slid down, the scepter shattering into 1,000 pieces of black dust. The room froze. General Hale had his weapon half raised, but he didn't fire. He was staring at the readings on his wrist scanner. "The energy output," Hale whispered. "It is synchronizing." Astra stood holding hands with Adrian and Celine. A triangle of light formed between them, gold from Celine, red from Adrian, and silver from Astra. It swirled and hardened, forming a tangible bond that pulsed with a heartbeat of its own. "I am not a tool," Astra declared, speaking to the terrified council. "I am not a weapon. I am the bridge. And a bridge needs two sides to stand." She looked at Celine. "The side of the moon." She looked at Adrian. "And the side of the stars." "This is impossible," the head priest stammered, clutching his prayer beads. "A human cannot be a guardian. The biological incompatibility and the neural rejection should kill him instantly." Astra smiled. It was a sad, sweet smile that looked far too old for her face. "He cannot be rejected," Astra said softly. "Because he is the blueprint." The room went silent. Even the hum of the core seemed to drop an octave. "What?" Adrian whispered. He looked down at his hands, which were glowing with the red light of the bond. "What do you mean, blueprint?" Astra let go of their hands and stepped back. She raised her arms, and the crystal dome above them shifted. The view of the core faded, replaced by a holographic projection, a memory pulled from the planet's deepest archives. It showed a dark, empty void, space. Then a signal appeared. A complex digital waveform, rippling through the darkness. 5 years ago, Astra narrated, her voice echoing in everyone's mind. The Terran Diplomatic Corps launched a probe into this sector. It was not a ship. It was a signal. A universal handshake protocol. A theoretical attempt to communicate with non-biological intelligences. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the project, Operation Rosetta. It had been a side project, a desperate attempt to find a translation matrix that worked on pure consciousness. To create the signal, Astra continued, they needed a complex neural map. A human mind digitized and broadcast as a template for contact. A mind that was capable of extreme empathy. A mind that was capable of deep sorrow. The hologram zoomed in on the waveform. It resolved into a DNA-like helix of data. "They used your mind, Adrian," Celine whispered, staring at the projection. "The scan they took of you before Sci-Fi." "It was a standard baseline scan," Adrian stammered. "They said it was for calibration. They said they deleted it." "They broadcast it," Astra said. "Into the dark, calling out. 'Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?'" The scene shifted. It showed Lunaris, a lonely, silver world, humming to itself in the cold vacuum. "I heard you," Astra said, looking at Adrian. "The planet heard you." It was the first time Lunaris had ever heard a voice that felt compatible. The signal was full of hope, but also full of a terrible, aching loneliness. The planet understood loneliness. The hologram showed the energy of the planet reaching out, catching the signal, pulling it down into the silver forests. "The planet wanted to answer," Astra explained, "but it had no mouth. So it made one. It took the biological material of the Empress, the strongest vessel available, and it took the structural architecture of the signal. It wove them together." She stepped forward and placed her hand on Adrian's chest. "My biological mother is Celine," Astra said. "But the map of my mind, the way I think, the way I feel, the way I listen." She looked up at him, tears brimming in her black eyes. "That came from you, Dad. I am not just a metaphor. I am a copy of your hope grown in the garden of her sorrow." Adrian fell to his knees. The revelation hit him with the force of a falling star. He wasn't an invader. He wasn't just a translator passing through. He had been here for 5 years. The part of him that he thought he had lost after Sci-Fi, the optimism, the desire to connect the pure, unjaded soul of the young linguist, hadn't died. It had traveled across the stars and taken root here. His sin at Sci-Fi had been a failure to listen. But his ghost on Lunaris had been born from the desire to be heard. Adrian choked out. I did not know. We know, Celine whispered, kneeling beside him. She wrapped her arms around him, her 9 tails creating a curtain of white silk around them. We know. Kurath, struggling to his feet near the wall, looked at the hologram in horror. A human inside the child. It is an abomination. It is evolution, Celine shouted, turning on him with fierce pride. It is proof that we are not meant to be alone. We are compatible, Kurath. Not just biologically, but spiritually. She looked at General Hale. General, do you see you cannot conquer this planet? You are already part of it. Your code runs in the veins of our God. Hale lowered his weapon. He looked at the scanner, then at Adrian, then at the child. He was a military man, a man of hard lines and clear objectives. But he was not a fool. The strategic analysis, Hale said slowly, has just changed. If the human neural architecture is the foundation of the interface, then destroying the interface is effectively friendly fire. He holstered his pistol. Command, Hale spoke into his headset. Stand down. Repeat, stand down. We have a diplomatic resolution. The target is recognized as a Terran dependent. The tension in the room broke like a fever. The core flared one last time, a soft, warm gold light that washed over the chamber. It felt like a sigh of relief. The floor stopped vibrating. The ominous red lightning in the atmosphere vanished. Astra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It is done, she said. The roots are tied, not with chains, with hands. She opened her eyes and looked at the council. I am Astra. I am the voice. And I say, open the sky. The aftermath was less of a battle and more of a reshuffling of the deck. Kurath was not executed. That would have made him a martyr. Instead, Celine appointed him to the new role of Keeper of the History. He was tasked with recording the events of the day in the great archives, a punishment that forced him to write, over and over again, the story of how he had been wrong. He sat in the library grumbling and sharpening his quills, stripped of power, but left with his pride and a very attentive audience of young foxes who found his grumpy demeanor hilarious. General Hale got his energy. The Symbiont Treaty was drafted within 3 days. Earth provided orbital defense platforms and advanced medical technology. In exchange, Lunaris opened the geothermal vents of the core piping excess plasma to the Terran capacitors. It was clean, it was efficient, and, most importantly, it was consensual. But the real change happened in the Mirror Palace. The mirrors were taken down. Not all of them. Some were kept for aesthetic reasons, but the great walls that blocked the sun were removed. The palace was open to the forest. Vines grew up the throne. Birds nested in the chandeliers. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Adrian stood on the balcony of the royal apartments, looking out over the city. He wore a loose tunic of Terran cut, but Lunaris fabric. He had finally shaved, though he looked 5 years older than when he had arrived. Thinking about running away, Celine asked, stepping onto the balcony. She handed him a cup of spiced tea. She looked radiant. The weight of the crown was still there, but she wore it differently now. She wore it like a hat, not a helmet. I was thinking about the paperwork, Adrian said, taking the tea. The diplomatic corps is demanding a retroactive birth certificate for Astra. They want to know how to classify her. Dual citizenship. Artificial intelligence, biological miracle. Tell them she is a Category 1 troublemaker, Celine laughed. She tied 2 of my guards together by their tails this morning. She gets that from you, Adrian said. The mischievous streak. And she gets the stubbornness from you, Celine countered, leaning against him. She refused to go to bed last night until I read her the entire encyclical on orbital mechanics. Adrian smiled. He put his arm around her. It felt natural now. The fear of overstepping, the fear of cultural contamination, it was all gone. They were just 2 tired parents trying to raise a planet. Do you regret it? Adrian asked suddenly. What? Choosing this, choosing me. You could have had a normal reign. You could have had a fox consort and a quiet life. Celine looked out at the silver trees. I lived a quiet life for 200 years, Adrian. It was deafening. She turned to him, her violet eyes serious. You gave me a voice. You gave my daughter a father. And you gave my world a future that isn't just a reflection of the past. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was slow, deliberate, and tasted like cinnamon tea. No, she whispered against his lips. I do not regret a single mistranslation. Hey. They broke apart. Astra was standing in the doorway holding a datapad and looking annoyed. I am trying to calibrate the planetary defense grid, she complained. And your gross emotional resonance is interfering with the signal. Family meeting, Adrian declared, grabbing Astra as she tried to run away. He swung her up into the air. Put me down, Astra giggled, her tails thrashing happily. I am a sovereign entity. I have diplomatic immunity. You are grounded, Celine declared, joining the fray and tickling the sovereign entity until she shrieked with laughter. No defense grids before dinner. This is tyranny, Astra gasped, escaping Adrian's grip and landing on the railing. She looked at them both, her face flushed with joy. She held out her hands. Okay, she said. Serious mode. The planet says hello. Hello to the planet, Adrian said. And, Astra added, her eyes flashing with a brief, deep silver light. It says thank you for coming back. Adrian felt a lump in his throat. He looked at the sky, at the stars, where he had once sent a lonely signal, hoping someone would hear. Tell the planet, Adrian, said his voice thick with emotion, that I am never leaving again. Astra beamed. She jumped down and wedged herself between them, grabbing their hands. Good, she said, because we have a lot of work to do. Hale wants to build a golf course on the southern continent, and the moss is threatening to eat his balls. We need to go translate. Family meeting adjourned, Celine laughed. To the golf course. They walked back inside, leaving the balcony empty. Above them, the twin suns set and the silver forest began to sing a song of 3 parts, harmonizing in the dark. Epilogue, 20 years later. The University of Xenolinguistics on Lunaris was not a building. It was a forest. Students from a dozen systems sat on the mossy ground, their eyes closed, listening. There were Terrans, foxes, reptilians, from the She-Seti survivors colony, and species that were barely more than clouds of gas. Adrian Cole walked among them. His hair was gray now, but his back was straight. He carried a walking stick made of silver wood, not because he needed it, but because Astra had carved it for him. Remember, Adrian's voice carried through the glade. You cannot translate a culture if you are standing outside of it. You have to step in. You have to risk the misunderstanding. He stopped by a young Terran student who was struggling to understand the tail flick language of a fox peer. Don't look at the tail, Adrian advised gently. Look at the eyes. The tail is just the punctuation. The sentence is in the face. Yes, Professor Cole, the student stammered. A bell chimed, a deep, resonant sound that came from the earth itself. Class dismissed. Adrian walked up the path toward the palace. The mirrors were long gone, replaced by open archways. Celine was waiting for him in the garden. She looked ageless, her fur still as white as snow, though her movements were more measured. She was reading a report from the council. High Counselor Kuroth has lodged a complaint, she said, without looking up. He says the students are too loud. They are disturbing his nap. Tell him to buy earplugs, Adrian said, kissing her on the forehead. Or I will send Astra to talk to him. Please don't, Celine chuckled. The last time she talked to him, she convinced him that the Corps wanted him to take up tap dancing. He is still practicing in secret. A shuttle roared overhead, descending toward the landing pad. It was a new model, sleek and organic in design. She is back, Adrian said, watching the ship land. Astra walked down the ramp. She was grown now, a striking figure of silver grace and human determination. She wore the uniform of the Interstellar Peacekeeping Force, but she had modified it with a sash of Lunaris silk. She wasn't alone. Behind her trailed a group of children refugees from a war-torn system 3 sectors away. They looked frightened, their large eyes darting around at the strange singing forest. Astra knelt down on the landing pad. She placed her hand on the ground. "It is okay," she said to the children. "Listen." The ground hummed, a soft, welcoming vibration. "This is Lunaris," Astra said. "She says hello." One of the refugee children, a small creature with blue scales, stepped forward. "Does she own us?" the child whispered. Astra shook her head. She looked up at Adrian and Celine, who were watching from the garden. She smiled the same smile she had worn in the Chamber of Roots 20 years ago. "No," Astra said. "She doesn't own anyone. She is just a friend who likes to listen." She stood up and held out her hand. "Come on. I want you to meet my parents. My dad tells terrible jokes and my mom runs the galaxy, but they make really good tea." As the children followed her toward the palace, Adrian put his arm around Celine. "We did okay," he whispered. "We did," Celine agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "We translated it perfectly." The wind blew through the silver leaves, and for a moment the entire planet seemed to whisper a single word: home.